The morning began like any other, too early, too gray, and too indifferent. The government building rose out of the concrete like a forgotten relic of stricter times, wide steps, sand-colored facade, windows that didn't open. Inside, the walls hummed with dull fluorescent light and tension that never left. Civil servants arrived in waves, passing through security with tired eyes and coffee cups clutched like lifelines. No one paid attention to the janitor who had already been there for an hour. He moved quietly, mop in hand, cart rolling beside him. He didn't nod, didn't greet. He moved like routine made flesh, as though he'd been pushing that cart since the building's foundation dried. The name patch on his chest was nearly unreadable, and the barcode ID clipped to his collar blinked red when scanned, but no one scanned it. No one cared. He was beneath protocol, beneath suspicion. At precisely 6:47 a.m., he stepped into an elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. It was a small anomaly. Janitorial staff usually worked bottom-up. No one noticed. He moved past executive offices into a storage room that hadn't been opened in months. Inside, he reached into his cart and pulled out a sealed folder, a slim laptop, and a heavy badge that shimmered under the flickering light. He sat, logged in, waited for the building to wake up. He had read every report, every payroll discrepancy, every invoice that didn't match the delivery logs. He knew which departments used cleaning budgets as slush funds. He knew which procurement officer approved contracts for vendors that didn't exist. He knew the names of every department head who had falsified records to meet compliance thresholds. He wasn't here to clean the floor. He was here to expose the rot. Downstairs, the employees were arriving. Among them was Clara Hastings, Assistant Director of Logistics, 32, eager to impress and terrified of fading into the bland machinery of government. She was the one who yelled at him that morning. She didn't remember it by the time she reached her desk. Just another body in the building. Just another janitor in the hallway. But he remembered her. Not for the shout. For the name. Clara Hastings had signed off on 9 inflated contracts in the last fiscal year. None had triggered alarms because they'd been split below oversight thresholds. Clever. Invisible. Until now. The Inspector General had been watching. By 9 a.m., the building was humming. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. Meetings began. The janitor wheeled his cart past cubicles, past laughter and stress and power lunches being scheduled over emails. He nodded at no one. Eyes down. A ghost in gray. By noon, the first memo hit. An anonymous internal audit. Targeted. Specific. For departments flagged for immediate review. The subject lines were clinical. The effect was nuclear. Panic spread like static in the walls. Managers met behind closed doors. Assistants refreshed inboxes with trembling fingers. One administrator in human resources made 3 phone calls in the space of 10 minutes, all to unlisted numbers. And still, the janitor mopped. In the lobby, a junior coordinator spilled an entire caramel latte on the floor and barked across the hallway, "Clean this mess, janitor. And hurry, we have an inspection today." He approached silently, took the mop, and began to wipe the floor. Her voice was loud. Her badge hung too low. Her mouth was quicker than her mind. She didn't notice the flash drive he had dropped into the vent near the baseboard. She didn't notice the small, hidden lens in the corner that rotated ever so slightly toward her desk. She didn't know that her name had already appeared in the procurement logs of a fictitious company that charged $27,000 for ergonomic chairs that never arrived. By 3 p.m., the Office of Internal Affairs received an encrypted message. It contained timestamped footage, transaction reports, and personnel movement logs. The subject line was simple: Begin Cleanup Protocol, Phase 1. By 4:15 p.m., an emergency meeting was called on the executive floor. 5 people entered. Only 2 exited with jobs. The janitor was not among them. But his name appeared in the security logs under a different credential, one known only to 5 people in Washington. And one of them was dead. At 5:31 p.m., he exited the building, cart returned, badge erased. He left through the side door, past a security guard who didn't ask for ID. No one stopped him. No one even looked up. But on the 8th floor, someone finally checked the signature at the bottom of the audit memo. It read, Office of the Inspector General. Authorization, J. Stone. Alias, Maintenance ID number 20458. The building went quiet. The mess was being cleaned. And this time, it wasn't just coffee on the floor. The next morning began with tension that no caffeine could dilute. Rumors had metastasized overnight, whispers of a sting, an audit, someone being escorted out without a word. The HR manager, whose door never closed, now kept it locked. The assistant director of procurement was suddenly on leave. Those who had once barked commands down the hallway now moved with careful steps and darting eyes. Yet, amid this rising uncertainty, the janitor returned just as invisible as the day before. He walked the same path. Same cart. Same mop. The same faded jumpsuit that made him irrelevant to everyone who had something to hide. But behind the stitched name patch was a chest full of files. Behind the mop handle, calloused hands once used to stamp closures on million-dollar contracts and seal sealed indictments. He wore invisibility like armor. He entered office 314 without knocking. The room was dark and used for months. Officially, it was listed as under renovation. Unofficially, it was a satellite command center. He placed a black duffel bag beneath the maintenance sink. Inside, a burner laptop, a signal scrambler, and a badge printer encoded with 4 levels of clearance. He didn't need backup. He needed reach. By 8:20 a.m., he was already on the executive floor again, vacuuming near the edge of the conference wing. The vacuum wasn't plugged in. It didn't need to be. The noise was just enough to mask the click of the microphone he planted under the primary table. No one noticed. They rarely did. At 8:41 a.m., 4 department heads entered conference room D. They spoke softly, but the room's glass walls gave nothing in the way of privacy. One mentioned the audit. Another asked if IT could make some reports disappear. A third laughed and said they should offer the inspector general box seats to the Knicks. The fourth didn't laugh. At 8:43 a.m., a text was sent to the inspector's secure device, attempting to tamper with logs. Floor 11. Room D. He continued vacuuming. The woman who had barked at him to clean spilled coffee the day before was now standing at the vending machine. Her hands shook slightly as she punched the keypad. Her usual bravado was muted. In her other hand, she held a manila folder with a forged signature. It was dated back 4 months but printed yesterday. He passed behind her slowly and noticed the ink still slightly glistened on the lower edge of the signature. She turned, offered him a tight smile. He nodded once, slowly, and kept walking. At 10:12 a.m., a courier arrived with an envelope marked urgent. It was handed directly to the deputy chief of operations. Inside was a set of invoices flagged by an anonymous reviewer. The accompanying note said only. Compare with system backups. Discrepancies found. The envelope had no return address, but the watermark on the paper matched those used by the Internal Oversight Council in Washington. Down in the basement, the janitor entered the records room using a master key, an outdated skeleton model that bypassed modern electronic locks. Inside, among rusted cabinets and forgotten stacks of paper, he pulled 3 boxes marked non-active. Inside were receipts. Receipts that should not have existed. Transactions that no one in procurement had reported, all dated within weekends and holidays, times no government office should have been processing funds. He photographed every page, uploaded them to a secure, rotating satellite server, tagging each image with its ledger code and transaction key. At 11:27 a.m., he sent a single file titled Proof A1 to the Office of the Comptroller General. He had no need to wait for a reply. Upstairs, Clara Hastings stood at her desk and opened a folder with trembling hands. Inside were screenshots of her emails, her authorizations, her unofficial side agreement with a shell contractor based out of a mailbox in Phoenix. No one was supposed to know about that, but the name signed at the bottom of the message burned like a brand. Inspector General, Federal Records Review. No such thing as off the books. She dropped the folder, looked up. Across the floor, the janitor stood at the far end of the hallway wiping a window. He didn't move. He didn't smile. But she knew. She knew. By 1 p.m., she was gone. Her desk cleared. Her access badge deactivated. At 2:03 p.m., the janitor unplugged his fake vacuum, folded a note, slid it into the desk drawer of the deputy chief of operations. A message that read, Audit complete. Phase 2 begins Monday. No name. No title. Just a gold seal. That evening, he exited through the freight elevator, rolled his cart into the back of a rusted van with no license plate, closed the door, sat behind the wheel and looked in the rearview mirror at the steel tower behind him. He didn't smile. He turned the key and drove into the dark. The building was quieter the next day, not in volume but in tone. The usual office chatter, passive-aggressive sighs, and caffeine-fueled conversations had flattened into a dull buzz of watchfulness. Employees moved like chess pieces on a board they no longer understood. Every action felt observed. Every file opened too slowly. Every hallway passed like a gauntlet. And still, the janitor returned. No one had asked his name. No one had questioned why he hadn't missed a single shift in 2 weeks. No one had noticed the way he avoided certain security cameras or the way his cart was slightly heavier than regulation. He kept the rhythm of invisibility like a sacred drumbeat. But the building was shifting. He entered through the service entrance, nodded at the bored security guard who never looked up from his crossword, and made his way to the sub-basement archives. It was the only floor not connected to the main surveillance system. That alone made it the most dangerous room in the building and the most useful. Inside, behind rusted shelving and misfiled reports, was a locked gray cabinet marked Retired Personnel Records. He opened it with a key no one else remembered giving him and pulled out a folder dated 5 years prior. Inside was a name, David Wexler, former Chief Inspector General. Found dead in a parking garage 2 months before his scheduled testimony before the Senate Oversight Committee. They had called it a suicide. The case had been closed within 48 hours. But the report in the folder, the real one, told a different story. A review Wexler had conducted into this very agency, a paper trail that linked at least 4 executives to offshore accounts and procurement scams stretching over a decade. Wexler had known. Now so did he. He scanned every page, uploaded it to a secure blockchain node keyed to a dead man's biometric profile, one that now matched his own since the surgery. He had prepared for this day for years, changing his name, destroying his records, rebuilding himself into a ghost with clearance and cause. And now he had the trigger. Upstairs, the director of compliance, a man with a firm handshake and a rotting conscience, was preparing for a press event. Smiling too often, pretending not to sweat. His department had just issued a public statement declaring total transparency following a routine internal audit. The media would eat it up. They always did. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the speech he was preparing would be interrupted. Because at 11 a.m., precisely as he took the podium, 3 black cars would pull up to the entrance. And men in suits, not for fashion but for federal operations, would enter the building. But before that, there was one final room to clean. The janitor made his way to the Data Integrity Suite. A room hidden behind the guise of IT maintenance, staff only. Inside were the real servers. Not the ones they showed investors. The backups. The duplicates. The erased but still resident files. He bypassed the fingerprint scanner with a replica of the CTO's digit, inserted a flash key that disabled logging software, and uploaded one folder. Wexler testimony, final draft plus evidence chain. Then he set the system to broadcast a sync to federal offices in Washington, flagged time-sensitive, criminal proceedings, priority black. Outside, thunder rolled. The sky above the city cracked in gray and ash. Sirens began to echo in the distance. 3 cars stopped at the front curb. Black boots stepped onto pavement. Upstairs, the director smiled into the camera. Until he saw the back doors open. Until he saw the agents approaching. Until he saw the janitor standing in the corner, mop in hand, eyes fixed on him, not with fear, not with obedience, but with judgment. At 11:02 a.m., the microphone was cut. At 11:04 a.m., 4 executives were removed from the building in silence. By noon, news broke across 5 networks. Corruption uncovered, federal sweep at Central Oversight Bureau. No names had been officially released. No agency claimed responsibility. But one photo emerged on a private watchdog blog later that afternoon. It showed a man in gray, walking alone through the freight hallway, pushing a mop bucket that wasn't wet. The caption read, "The inspector returns." He disappeared again after that. But the building would never forget. Because the janitor wasn't there to clean floors. He was there to clean the system. And the next building was already waiting. The city didn't blink. Not really. Even as 4 high-ranking officials were marched into federal custody, even as networks flared with breaking news and headlines blurred across glowing screens, the city simply continued, horns blaring, feet pounding pavement. Windows glowing in early dusk like nothing had changed. But inside the building he had just left behind, everything had. Doors that once opened with smug ease now required authorization codes that no longer worked. Offices that used to buzz with false confidence now stood quiet, their computers seized, their secrets exposed. Some staff packed their things in cardboard boxes. Others lingered, unsure whether they still had jobs or simply hadn't yet been removed. And somewhere among it all, rumors circled like vultures. Rumors about a man in gray. About a mop with no water. About surveillance feeds that glitched at all the wrong moments. About a signature on an audit report that no one remembered approving but that had set off a chain reaction ending careers and reviving investigations thought long buried. They called him a ghost. A myth. Some said he was CIA. Others claimed military intelligence, deep cover. One woman swore he was just a janitor who got lucky. They were all wrong. He was the inspector general. And his work wasn't done. 2 days later, in a different city, in a different building, a woman in a navy pantsuit paced inside a pristine glass office. The Department of Institutional Procurement. Another branch. Another pillar in the same rotting structure. She was speaking in clipped tones into a secure line, agitated, demanding answers about the sweep. She mentioned Wexler. She mentioned containment. She mentioned a name. James Stone. The name had not been spoken aloud in 10 years. The voice on the other end of the line paused, then replied with chilling precision, "He's not your problem anymore." But he was. That same afternoon, the janitor stepped off a regional train. The platform was empty, save for the wind and a pigeon limping between gum-stained tiles. He carried no luggage. Just a duffel bag, heavier than it looked, and the same gray uniform that allowed him to pass through spaces unseen. He had come to a building no one ever noticed, a regional office for public grant allocations. An office that handled billions. An office that had never once in its entire operational history been audited. The receptionist smiled when he walked in. She didn't ask for ID. She pointed toward the janitorial room on the lower level. Perfect. The room was small and unused. A cracked sink, a broken bucket, a single dim bulb. He didn't mind. He opened his bag, unzipped the lining, and removed a black binder marked with only one word, pending. Inside were 12 profiles, 12 names, 12 buildings, 12 rot-filled towers disguised as bureaucratic temples. He reviewed each one like a surgeon preparing for incisions. Cross-referenced dates, budget spikes, personnel inconsistencies. A contractor paid twice in the same week for the same service. A subcontractor who didn't exist. A digital paper trail leading back to a private office listed as vacant. He already knew where the bodies were buried. He was here to dig them up. At 2:34 p.m., he walked the hallway of the building's first floor, where a puddle from a leaky ceiling had pooled on the tile. A junior manager turned the corner and wrinkled her nose. "Clean this mess, janitor," she muttered, almost without seeing him. He knelt down beside the water with a small towel. She walked off without noticing the black box he had slipped behind the hallway vent. A device smaller than a deck of cards, now listening to every conversation in the corridor. By 3 p.m., the server pinged. A transmission received. 5 terabytes of internal communication. Flagged, filtered, archived. And in his earpiece, a quiet voice spoke. "Proceed." He didn't nod. He simply rose, left the puddle behind, and began again. The 5th building on the list was the most dangerous. Not because it was heavily guarded or buried in red tape, but because it was beloved. A regional headquarters for civic infrastructure, it had won awards for transparency, hosted panels on ethical management, and appeared in glossy government brochures as the model of modern integrity. The director was a local celebrity, well-dressed, media-savvy, fluent in every dialect of diplomacy. He spoke in clean numbers, smiled in rehearsed sympathy, and stood at ribbon cuttings like a shepherd of public good. But Eliza Wexler's notes had said otherwise. Yes, Eliza, daughter of David Wexler, a quiet analyst in a federal archive division, and the one person who had continued her father's search after his staged suicide. She had pieced together the fragments, fake contracts, recycled authorizations, dummy vendors, and digital ghosts. She had tracked a trail of falsified disaster relief funds routed through this very building and had encrypted the final results under one word: Stone. It was she who had sent the package to the inspector. No note, just a key. He used that key now, opening the 4th floor maintenance panel at 6:43 a.m., bypassing the electrical grid to install a fiber tap into the internal data node. It was crude but clean. Invisible. It would grant him 3 days of total access, email logs, financial flows, digital fingerprints. That was all he needed. By 9 a.m., the director was on television again, smiling for cameras, thanking a local vendor for their continued partnership. That vendor did not exist. Its address was a storage unit. Its tax ID belonged to a man who had died in 2004. At 10:15 a.m., the janitor walked through the administrative wing. nodding silently to the same woman who had scolded him for being near executive-only corridors. She didn't recognize him. Not really. Few ever looked past the uniform. But he had recognized her from the data logs. The same name that had approved a wire transfer for emergency filtration systems in a city whose water remained undrinkable to this day. He passed her with a glance. No words, just a subtle press of a button in his jacket. Camera active. At 11:03 a.m., she would speak to the director about deleting the test accounts. By 11:06 a.m., that conversation would be recorded. At 12:17 p.m., an email was scheduled to deploy from a secure server to 5 agencies in D.C., each one timed with a different subject line. Misappropriation, 201 accounts. False infrastructure claims. Whistleblower communication, level 7 clearance. He didn't need to press send. The system would do it for him. At 2:50 p.m., the director exited his office with 2 assistants, joking about an upcoming award dinner. He stopped when he noticed the janitor kneeling beside a water cooler that hadn't worked in weeks. "You know," he said casually, "someone really ought to clean this place up properly." The janitor didn't look up. He only replied, "Already underway." The director smirked and walked away. But 23 minutes later, his smile would fade when his assistant entered his office with an urgent expression. She would whisper something about a call from Washington, something about subpoenas, something about investigators already en route. And then he would see it, an envelope on his desk, plain, unmarked. Inside, a single photo of a man in a mop uniform walking through a parking garage, the same garage where David Wexler had died. On the back, scrawled in pen, "This time, the story ends differently." That night, as the sun dipped behind concrete, the Inspector General entered a shuttered diner 2 counties over. Eliza Wexler was waiting in a corner booth. She didn't speak. Neither did he. She slid a USB drive across the table. He slid her a folder marked with the seal of Internal Federal Oversight. He opened it, scanned the names. There were still 3 buildings left. 3 towers of glass and concrete and rot. She stood. "You'll need help," she said. He didn't respond. He simply stood with her. Outside, the wind picked up. The street was quiet, but the storm was already moving. It ended where it began. Not with applause, not with press conferences, not with the fall of a single villain. It ended with a man in a gray jumpsuit pushing a mop cart through the polished halls of a building no one suspected, yet everyone trusted. The nation's flagship public agency for emergency management. A fortress of bureaucracy and paper smiles. But this building had secrets. Its blueprints had been tampered with to hide unauthorized access points. Its payrolls bore names of employees who hadn't been alive for years. Its surveillance logs were scrubbed daily, yet the deletion protocols came from a system that didn't exist on any network map. The money that flowed through its veins was untraceable, but not invisible. That was why he was here. The Inspector General had saved the worst for last. He moved down the corridor like a shadow stitched to routine. The cameras saw nothing more than a cleaner. The guards waved him through without a second glance. The administrative staff smiled at him, already forgetting him as they turned away. Their systems weren't built to see people like him, which is why they'd never seen him coming. Eliza was already inside. Weeks prior, she'd secured a contract as a freelance software consultant. No one questioned her references. They were perfect, crafted by someone who'd once managed classified HR for federal contractors. Her role? Back-end diagnostics. But her actual mission was far simpler. Open the vault. The vault wasn't a literal one. It was a blacklisted storage server tucked behind 5 firewalls and a fake public-facing intranet. A place where decades of falsified reports, ghost contracts, and redirected emergency funds were buried. The kind of archive no journalist could ever FOIA. The kind built by people who knew how to disappear data and lives. At 11:23 a.m., her message reached him through a secure pulse device. Entry confirmed. Files unlocked. Begin upload. He moved to the IT wing, badge already copied from a borrowed janitorial swipe. A panel in the hallway blinked twice and gave way. Behind it, a terminal waited. Outdated. Forgotten. But still connected. He inserted the key drive and initiated the transfer. One by one, the files began to upload. Wexler_evidence_final. Wexler_audio_logs. Wexler_whistlechin_crosschecked. And finally, the last folder, CLNSW_protocol. As it uploaded across the country in federal command rooms and encrypted terminals, agents began to receive notifications. Investigators who had once been silenced now had cause to reawaken. Case numbers long thought dead blinked back to life. And the rot, once buried so deep it had grown roots into the foundation of the agency, was now exposed. Back in the building, the director of the agency stood in his corner office, overlooking the city. He sipped coffee, glanced at a glowing screen of meaningless dashboards. He was a man who believed he'd already won, that the worst had passed. That corruption was simply a fee paid by the clever. He never noticed the janitor standing across the hall. He never recognized the face from a case file his people had buried a decade ago. He never saw the final envelope slipped under his door 5 minutes later. Inside it, one sentence. This building is clean. You are not. An hour later, federal agents would enter. Quiet. Coordinated. They wouldn't knock. They wouldn't have to. Across the country, in a small diner now permanently closed to the public, Eliza and Stone sat in silence. Outside, the wind had calmed. The sky was steel blue. For the first time in years, the air didn't taste like smoke. He placed the final folder on the table between them. Blank. Clean. She looked at him. It's over. He shook his head slowly. Not yet. There's always another building. But this time, they wouldn't go alone. Behind them, at a long corner table, for new faces sat. Former analysts. Quiet staff. People who had seen too much and said nothing. Until now. The room was full of ghosts. And all of them had brooms.